Well, first off, I appreciate everybody coming out. I know you have probably innumerable other places where you could be, so thank you very much. And for my students, just remember to type your paragraph and upload it to Blackboard. Again, that's for my students only. If you don't know me, that's me. Bryan Rufener is my name. Teach communications courses out here at RTP and online as well. Okay, so for the next, we're going to be going for about the next 60 minutes. I'm going to try to condense this down as much as I can. I usually teach this in class, so I'll try to distill it down to the most important elements. So again, it's using the STAR method to land your dream job or your non-dream job, a job. So I can't take credit for it, but I learned this probably, you can find the STAR method. It's basically like a storytelling method, okay, to answering interview questions, okay? So I learned it, probably 15 years ago or so, many years ago. I lived out in California, and I had this California dream that I was going to live in La Jolla, right outside of San Diego, move down there, no money, no idea. Not a smart move, but the one thing I did learn was, does anyone know what a headhunter is? Like, I'll probably ask, my students know I like to ask questions and you can be interactive and stuff. Somebody, does anyone know what a headhunter is? Somebody tell me what that is? Anybody? Headhunter? Okay, it's a recruiter, okay, like a job recruiter. So I linked up with this job recruiter. Her name was Seema, and basically it was her job to get me a job. So she would like coach me up on how to answer interview questions. And she, super aggressive woman, I would say. She actually made me cry a couple times, I'm not gonna lie. She literally made me cry a few times, but she taught me this STAR method, and I promise I'm not gonna make any of you cry in here. And this isn't to brag, it's just to inform you that I've employed this method because Seema told me, like she would record me, and this was way back in the day when, the camcorders were like huge, and she was recording me, and she was like asking me interview questions and like why do you want to work for Standard Paper or whatever, and she went, and I started giving some terrible answer. I was right out of undergraduate, and she went like that. She's like, "Shut up, Bryan." She's like, "Shut up." And I was like, "Wow, okay, I'll shut up." She said, "Look, if you want to answer questions like that," she's like, "just move back to your mom's basement. That's fine. You're not going to make it out here. You're not going to find a job." I mean, she was like straight up, just like to the point. I was like, "Wow, okay. All right, Seema, appreciate you." And so anyway, she said, if you follow this method, she's like, you will get hired for about 50% of the jobs that you interview for. Back in the day, I had no context for that. I was like, 50, that sounded pretty good, right? And that's actually really good. And so and again, she told me, she said, "Bryan," she's like, "Look, you're not overly handsome. She's like, you don't dress well. She's like, you're short. She's like, you're a minority. She's like, you have a lot of things against you on getting a job." And I'm like, "Appreciate it, thank you. I know these things already." And she said, "I say that because," she said, "so the one thing you can do to overcome those deficits," she's like, is outwork everybody in the room and follow this method. So to make a long story longer, I've used this method and it's never failed me. So again, I'm not trying to brag, this is just to inform. Every job I've interviewed for using this method, I've landed the job. Yeah, so it's like 10 for 10. That's how I fooled them into hiring me here at Wake Tech. Okay, so it works really well. Okay, so again, it's basically a storytelling method. So let's look at, so I'm gonna try to sort of set it up and show you why it works. But if you look at employment by the numbers, the source here was Glassdoor. I think this was 2017, so the data is a little bit old, but still pretty accurate. So you can see 250, the average number of resumes a corporate job opening will attract. So 250 resumes, right? Again, a corporate job, okay? One person gets the offer, right? So you can do the math. Well, I did the math for you right here. That's not 4%, right? For you math people, it's 0.004% of your chance to get a job, right? So I'm not trying to rain on your parade and say that you'll be, endlessly unemployed or underemployed. But what the point is you've got to make that interview count, right, and knock it out of the park, and be memorable in the eyes of any interview committee, right? Before we go, so in terms of a job interview, like doing your research, practicing the questions, or developing your answers, how long do you guys think that you should spend your time researching and practicing? Does anybody just throw a guess out there for one interview? Okay, so let's say they call up Kevin. Hey, Kevin, we got your resume. We'd like you to come in on Thursday at 10 a.m. So Kevin's got that interview with whoever, Cisco. And so how long should he research and practice developing his answers and practice his responses? You had your hand up? Go ahead.
Probably say about an hour just to get to know the company that you're trying to apply for. And then
Okay. 1 hour?
5 to 10 hours.
5 to 10 hours? Ooh, Lord. Okay, anybody else? A guess? Okay. So, and so this is the rule of thumb, and this is something Seema taught me, 5 to 8 hours. And so that's pretty shocking to a lot of students. So good guess. 5 to 10, 5 to 8, right? That's the rule of thumb. So what Seema taught me, it was really actually great advice. She said, if you put in the work, then you can trust the work when you get to the interview. Does that make sense? So again, that's just for context. Like, I try to pitch this as it's not some secret infomercial type of thing. You follow my system and you'll get hired. No, right? I mean, you obviously have to put in the work, right? So, but first, so before we get into the STAR storytelling method, there's one thing that is absolutely critical, right? And I think you mentioned it. You have to research the organization in detail, right? And obviously with the advent of the internet, you guys can get a lot of detail, right? Research the organization, position, history, all of these stuff, the culture, the specialized nomenclature. What I mean by that is like any specialized, terminology that they have at the company. So, for example, if someone were to ask you, well, how do you think most people answer questions like, oh, Vanessa, why do you want to work for, AT&T? Or why do you want to work for IBM? I'm not actually putting you on the spot, but I mean, how do you think most people respond to that sort of question? What kind of answers are typical? Jay, go ahead.
They would start by saying, I want to work for whatever your company name is. And then they would say something like, I guess because I don't know, I like the environment here or something.
Yeah, okay, right, exactly.
Like what the company stands for, what they're.
Okay. So good guess, Jade. So it would be sort of, and I'm not dogging your answers, but sort of general answers like that, right? I like the environment here. What else? What are some other sort of general answers? Like I'm a hard worker, right? You hear that? I'm a team player.
What they do.
Yeah, so answers like that, right? And so that's when Seema really got on me, because I started answering questions like, oh, well, I'm a team player, I'm a hard worker, I'm dedicated, right? Who isn't in a job interview, right? Everybody's the best, okay? So that was her move. She went, she was like, shut up, Bryan. And I was like, okay. She's like, again, if you can answer questions like that, but, and so I remembered that. And so in terms of researching the organization, so for example, and my students know I like to tell these long drawn out stories, I went to an interview for CH2M Hill. And so I just want to juxtapose the sort of one answer versus the answer that she taught me to give. So I went for an interview at CH2M Hill in the Department of Defense. Yeah, it was like one of the largest engineering firms in the country. And it was just a job that I didn't expect to get, because I was underqualified. It paid a lot. I just saw the pay and I was like, I'll give it a try. And so I threw my hat in the ring, and they actually called me. And I was actually excited, but yet wishing they wouldn't have, because I'm like, oh, I'm over my head. So they flew me out to the headquarters. I'm in there. It was in Denver. I'm looking at this huge building. They walked me in. And anyway, I go in, and I'm already nervous. I'm super nervous, super intimidated. It's years ago. And I walk in there, and there's like 7 vice presidents sitting across the table from me. I'm like, you know that fight or flight thing, right? I wanted to fly away. But anyway, so the lady, one of the VPs, she's like, well, Bryan, she's like, why should we hire you here at CH2M Hill? And so, and again, I'd done my 5 to 8 hours of research. I'd studied the company. And I said, well, and I can still remember, this was years and years ago. So I told her name was Diane. I can still remember her name. I said, Diane, I said, that's a great question. I said, well, I know that last year CH2M Hill they'd gotten their biggest contract from the United States government, the Department of Defense, like $1.3 billion to do some groundwater remediation out in Nevada. And I said, I know 6 months prior you'd also gained a contract. It was for like $500 million to do some nuclear cleanup and abatement work in Southeast Washington State. And I said, and I know that you, and so I said, I would love to, I said, number one, so the company is successful. I said, I know you value like a work-life balance in your organization, as evidenced by like this little yellow book that you have on your website. And I said, so I would like to be involved in doing the public relations for a company like CH2M Hill. And so she stopped me right there. Like I had a bunch more to say. But do you see the difference between that answer versus I'm a team player, like nobody's gonna remember that, right? And so she stopped me right there. She's like, whoa. She's like, Bryan, she's like, you seem to know a lot about the company. I said, well, yeah, because look, was it my dream job? No, but I had to act like it was, right? Look, I'm just being honest here. So she's like, you seem to know a lot about CH2M Hill. And I said, oh, yeah. She's like, you read that little yellow book? And I said, I read it cover to cover. So the little yellow book was, just to give you context, it was like a little comic book written by the 3 founders who were engineering professors at the University of Oregon. And so it was a little comic book, and it talked about their corporate values and all this stuff, and like little stick figures. And so she's like, you read it? And I said, yeah. I said, I read it cover to cover. It was like 5 pages. And then she looked to all the other 6 VPs, and she's like, did you read it? And each one of them went, nope. And so at that moment, you know how sometimes you can feel a room sort of like the atmosphere sort of change and the energy change? So at that moment, I'm like, I got you, right? So I was like, I tried to flip the script on him, and so I'm like, well, I did read it, right? And so anyway, so I went and got the job, right? I got the job. It was actually the worst job I've ever had in my career because they lied. The culture was awful. But anyway, you see what I'm saying? So before we get into the STAR storytelling method, if you can know, because I used the terms they used, like abatement and groundwater remediation. I'm going to be honest, I didn't even know what that meant at the time. But not that I'm trying to be deceptive, but if you can use that kind of language, then they're like, oh, this guy knows what he's talking about, and he can come right in and do the job. Okay. So anyway. That is the point. The storytelling method works well for the majority of questions, but you have to research the organization in detail and know it in and out. Okay. So, like I said, the STAR method is a storytelling method. So, in essence, what you're doing is you're tapping. This is why it works so well, because you tap into the interviewer's brain, right? It's basically neuroscience. Okay. So. Like neuroscience, right? It says the study of the nervous system. It shows that oxytocin levels increase when you tell a detailed, like character-driven story. And that's what the STAR method is, which we'll get to and I'll show you. And then it says that chemical in the brain, when you tell a good story, a complete story, it raises that in the brain. And then that tells the person, oh, this is a trustworthy person, right? This is a safe person. That's what, obviously you want a future employer to think you're trustworthy and safe, and you're doing that just by the fact that you're telling a story, okay? And then you can also do what's called leverage the curiosity gap. So it's a psychological state where human beings were wired, like we want to know what happens next. Like what are some of your favorite, let's say, movies or TV shows, maybe that you've binged lately? Anybody?
Grey's Anatomy.
Grey's Anatomy, okay. Kevin, were you going to say something?
Nah. Yeah, Fast and Furious. Fast and Furious,
yeah, they've made like 18,000 of those, okay? So that's So you're taking advantage of the curiosity gap. And again, it's why that we read novels and binge shows and we can't put the book down and stuff like that. So basically, and look, and I'm not saying that your answers are on the level of being as entertaining as Fast and the Furious or Grey's Anatomy, but what I am saying is you tap into the neuroscience behind storytelling, okay? All right, so, right, the power of a story, right? Studies show that when researchers analyzed song lyrics, they showed the most popular songs were the ones that had really specific details, in which you'll see in the STAR method, your answers will have very, very specific details, okay, right? The most memorable movies, TV shows, books, they follow a structure, right? There's like a structure. There's a reason why everybody loves, the Fast and the Furious or Grey's Anatomy or Game of Thrones or whatever, right? Is because they follow a structure. And how many of you watched a movie recently where you thought like it stuck with you? Like you watch something and you're like, oh, like I remember, you walk away and you remember that, and you kind of have the residue of that particular book or show on you. You're like, oh, that impacted me. Okay, so usually those kinds of things follow a structure, right? This isn't an English or creative writing class, or a screenplay class, but so like Freytag's pyramid, for example, is a story structure, right? You have all of these parts, the exposition, the setup, right? The tension or the inciting incident, and so on and so forth, right? The falling action, the turning point, blah, blah, blah. So most of the books you read, the TV shows that you watch or whatever, follow a story structure. So the STAR method is a story structure, right? There's not that many parts, but you get what I'm saying, right? You get the point? So like, for example, everybody like Finding Nemo, right? I've seen that movie 9 billion times. I have 2 kids. So I can practically recite every word to you. But if you look at it, like it's, I don't know how many billions of dollars it's made, but everybody knows it. Everybody loves it for the most part, right? So if you look at like Finding Nemo, you can see it follows Freytag's structure to the letter. That's why everybody likes it. Like, you don't know why you like it, but people that write screenplays and creative types, they use this structure, right? The exposition, and I won't go through all of this, right? But you guys remember Marlon's wife gets killed by that barracuda. You remember that scene? For sure, okay? And then you've got the inciting incident. Nemo gets caught by that diver, okay? Right there, Nemo attempts to escape the aquarium. That's sort of the climax of the movie. And then all the way to the resolution, right? Marlin and Nemo reunite. So that's like the story structure. So again, my broader point is that you're going to also follow a story structure, and it's going to make your answers sound, be really, really good. Okay. So again, the STAR, it's an acronym, right? It's a technique that ensures. So here's the deal: it ensures you answer. It ensures you answer the questions completely, okay, and effectively. I've interviewed dozens and dozens of people. I've heard a lot of, frankly, embarrassing responses where, how you feel embarrassed for somebody? I've felt that many times in an interview for people, right? So you're able to harness the power of a good story, again, but within the context of a job interview, right? You're providing a powerful narrative arc for you, like whatever quality that they're looking for. If they ask a question, right, to Alani about, something that has to do with maybe how she deals with conflict at the workplace, well, if she would have prepared, she'll have a response that shows how she adeptly and really, deals with conflict at the workplace. That's a great narrative arc. It's very detailed. You see what I'm saying? So she just spouts it off, and they're like, "Woo, wow," because I've seen I've seen the difference between when people use the STAR method and when people don't. And I can tell you, juxtaposed, like the people that use the STAR method, they stand out far. I mean, they stand out, okay? Right, like it says there, you stand out, okay? So again, you're crafting a detailed narrative where you're the main character, right? It's simple. You're basically coming up with like 12 to 15 different scenarios, okay, where you're the main character think of it like a movie scene or the scene from a book, right? Okay, so you use the story to highlight the characteristic that the interview question addresses, right? Whether it be leadership, conflict, whatever, I don't know, what other character traits do people want to know about you in an interview? Reliability, yeah, all of those things, right? So again, the narrative shows that you are the best fit, right? You're the best fit. You have the qualities and skills the employer is looking for, and you're passionate and enthusiastic about the job. Because when I got the job, well, I worked at Durham Tech previously, before I came over to Wake Tech. They interviewed, like, after I found out, they interviewed like 40 people, which was like an absurd amount of people to interview. And I was the first person to be interviewed. And my students know this because I think I told them before. The interview was at 5 in the morning, and it was over Skype. And I was the first person. So I was like, ooh, that's tough, right? That's tough to make an impression over Skype and at 5 in the morning, you know, because I was over on the West Coast, so it was 8 o'clock here. I'm like, oh, thank you for accommodating me, Durham Tech, and making me wake up at, 3:30 in the morning to get ready for an interview at 5. But anyway, I used this narrative, and even over Skype, and then they interviewed 39 more people. And they told me, they said, Bryan, right after you interviewed, we knew that you were going to be like, we wanted you. We wanted to shut it down. Like, we wanted to shut it down. And I'm really, look, and I felt pretty confident about it, not because of anything I do that's great. It's because if someone gives you a response like, I'm a team worker, I'm a hard worker, I'm a team player, I'm a hard worker. Do you remember those responses? No, but if you give a response that's very detailed and very specific, the team that's interviewing you, they're going to remember that. They don't even know why, but they're just going to remember it. They'll be like, oh yeah, we remember that guy. Yeah, we remember that. We remember that gal. So, okay, so finally we'll get to the brass tacks here. So, how do I answer the questions effectively? Here's what the acronym stands for, okay? It stands for situation, okay? So again, this is within the context of an interview, right? Like, so you want to describe the situation in great detail. Be as detailed as you can. Dates, times, places, right? Give a lot of context. The task. Okay, so what was the task that was given to you? Okay, and then the action. What were your actions? Okay, not everybody else's, but what did you do? So what were your actions? And then what was the result? I used to not put this, but students would practice in class, and they'd give a story where the result was absolutely disastrous. I'm like, no. It's a happy ending, like a good ending that shows you in a great light. And then what were the results? Right, the positive results. Okay, that's sort of what. So again, situation, task, action, result. Okay, so if you have a sample question, right? Here's a sample question. Well, describe a time you had to deal with a difficult coworker. Who was involved? What was the outcome? Okay, so you can think about that in terms of, that has to deal with like interpersonal or organizational conflict. And inter-office relationships, okay? So what you do is then you think of a story, right, using the STAR method on how you successfully handled a situation where there was interpersonal conflict, okay? So when they ask you that question, boom, you're ready to go. You've got it memorized. You're like, oh, boom, bang, there you go. Does that make sense? And so, and again, just also I should say that examples from like the workplace work, but it doesn't have to be. Because like some of you maybe haven't had a job or have limited workplace experience, so it's fine. And people understand that, right? You're a recent college graduate. Maybe you had an internship. Maybe you were involved in a club or an activity, your church, your sports or whatever. Does that make sense? So it doesn't have to be just confined to on-the-job experience, okay? Because I get that question a lot, which makes total sense. Because when I was your age, I didn't have a ton of work experience either, so I had to go outside of a workplace context. Okay, but does that make sense? So you create a scenario, and the beauty of it is, even if this now think about this. Look at that question. What if you had to answer that right now? Right? Yeah, Leah. Hey, go ahead. I'm not going to really make you, but I mean that, that's like, yeah, it'd be nerve-wracking, very nerve-wracking, okay? Because that's a very detailed, you're going to sink, right? And I've seen people sink. I mean, it was just like the Titanic, like they're going down, and and it wasn't good. But the nice thing about it though is you can answer basically any question, even if it's worded different, but if it has to do with like conflict or a difficult coworker, if that's because every question gets at the heart of a matter, right? You have your response, boom, right there, okay? And that's the beauty of it. You'll sound articulate, detailed. I mean, you'll just be polished, okay? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you sort of how it plays out on the ground. And I've got 2 examples here. And look, these are, this guy here, okay, whoever that dude is, you're going to see it. Like he gives a response. Like if your responses can be on the level of this gentleman here, I tell you, you will get hired. Okay, so we'll watch his response, and then I have another one that I'll show you. But take note. I mean, this is the bar. Okay, this is the bar. This is where you want to be on this guy's level. Okay, so.
Well, with behavior-based interview questions, what employers are doing is they're looking at past behavior to get a predictor of future behavior. Let's say they ask, can you give me an example of a time where you took initiative to solve a problem? They want to hear a story about where you took initiative. And you need to organize that using the STAR technique, where you can talk about situation, task, action, and result. What I see a lot of students tend to do is they'll tell us a great story and forget the results. That's like watching a great movie and not seeing the ending of it.
Well, the STAR technique helps organize their thoughts. Behavioral interviewing is telling a story. You're telling us a story, you're setting up the situation so we understand exactly what you're doing. You set the frame, you set the picture for us in our minds. The task is, what was the problem, what was the issue, set that piece up. And I want to know what you did, not my manager did this or we did this. I want to hear a lot of what did you specifically do? And the results, how did it end? It's like telling a joke and not giving the punchline if you don't add the results in there.
When they get those behavioral questions, take it back to a specific example, explain what they did, set it up, give the details, and include a lot of names, dates, times, numbers, and places. The more details you can give, it really helps the employer understand the depth and breadth of what you accomplished. Oftentimes if a student is giving examples that say, we did this and we did that when they're talking about a committee, I will stop them and say, that's great that your committee did that, but what specifically did you do? And what I find oftentimes that they didn't do anything.
You really want to kind of go through your resume, go through the last couple of months of emails that you've had from student organizations, from your work, from different classes, and really get into the detailed, 1 or 2 or 3 detailed stories that you can tell, that you can actually know exactly what happened, exactly what the concept was, who was in the meeting, what the real problems were, what the detailed actions were, and not only what you did, but some of the options that you considered or that group considered before making the final decision, and then details in terms of what the result was.
Well, David, can you tell me about a time where you set a goal and you thought you did everything possible to achieve that goal but still fell short?
Sure. Actually, I had a similar experience to that during my internship during the summer of 2010 with UBS Investment Bank. I was working in their global healthcare group, and really one of the first type of tasks that we had was working with one of our major clients on a merger model. So we were doing a pitch for them and coming up with a hypothetical merger situation. And my task was to create the merger model and come up with the analysis so that we could show them our numbers so that it made sense. So one of my senior associates came to me and said, David, this is your task. Go ahead with it. We're not going to help you out. Do your very best, and we'll come to you at the end of the day. So I literally spent the next, I would say, 12 hours of that day working at a computer on my merger model, which I thought, man, I've spent 12 hours. It's going to be perfect. There's nothing wrong with this. And when I finally presented my model saying, we've got a accretion here. We're going to make money off of this deal. The client's going to love it. The very first thing they did once I printed it out was take a red pen and cross an X all the way through it. And they said, you did absolutely everything wrong that we were looking for. And although you spent 12 hours, we're now going to have to go and redo this. So me, you know, this is my first week as an intern, sitting there thinking, wow, I spent way more time than any full-time person would actually spend on this. And I did it all wrong. How is this possible? I'm not going to get a job at all. And now all my dreams of doing investment banking are ruined from this one engagement. And what I later realized was the fact that, you know, when you come in, and this is what they told me at the end of the summer once I finally received a full-time offer, when you come in, they understand you don't know everything. You know, you're not supposed to know every single thing about investment banking or your internship in general. When you come in, they want to see that you are putting forth the full effort, you're going above and beyond, and really trying to do your best in terms of what they show you and what they want you to do. So at the end, that same senior analyst who crossed an X directly through, which, you know, I will admit it was incorrect, my work, he later said, you know, David spent half of a day on this model. He didn't give up, he was determined, he was confident in his work and what he thought was right. Even though it ended up being wrong, that same determination was what helped him to really be a perfect candidate for what we're looking for as a full-time analyst. So although I failed, and I definitely did fail, I did my best and I learned from that experience and ultimately got a return offer from UBS.
Okay. All right, guys. So you can see, I mean, that was really, well, what did you think of it? How would you describe him? How would you describe his response?
Very detailed.
Very detailed, right? Very personal, right? So if you look at it, I mean, literally, it was like a 3-4 minute response. So star responses are long. But so if you think about it, a star response should have no gaps. Like after you hear that response, you should be able to say, what was the situation? What was the task? So I'll ask you guys, what was the situation? Yeah, a time he fell short, thought he did everything he could, but he fell short. But what was his specific situation that he discussed? To build a merger model, right? What was the task? Well, right. Show to the client, is there going to be increase, is there accretion, are they going to make money, right? His actions, what did he do? He worked for 12 hours straight, right? And you notice he used really vivid imagery. He's like, they placed a big X right on it and ripped, you know. And then what was the result? He got the, see, that's the key, because a question like that can go sideways quickly because it has to do with setbacks. And I've had students, when we do mock interviews, they end it and it's like, well, you didn't bounce back from the setback. Like the setback beat you, right? And that happens to every one of us, but don't do that. Don't pick that as your example, right? So he was able to turn that around. But you see, I mean, he's very articulate, very friendly, very personable, very professional. Like I said, and that's a difficult question, okay? So again, that's sort of the level that you want to be at, is if you can, but again, with your own personality, with the way that you communicate, but that's sort of on par. It's a really excellent response, okay, to a difficult question. Here's another one I'm going to show you. This is from Michigan State. And again, this one, how to deal with a difficult coworker, I've seen it go down in flames. I asked the guy in an interview, tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult coworker or a supervisor. He had not practiced. He started doing all these weird body, you know, when you don't practice, what happens? And you're in the hot seat, you start doing weird things. He started fidgeting around. He said, yeah, and this is for a professional job, financial aid position. And he said, well, and I could tell he hadn't practiced because you could see it on his face, his affect changed, and he got nervous. He said, well, he's like, yeah, and I can't, okay. He's like, oh, well, he's like, me and my boss at my last job, we didn't get along at all. I'm like, I was like, I was in my brain, I'm like, just shut up right now. Just stop talking. And he's like, yeah, we didn't get along at all. I said, and, you know, and I just let him talk, you know. And I was like, oh, okay. And he's like, yeah, we didn't get along at all. There was a lot of conflict. Our personality just clashed. I'm like, bro, what do you, no, stop. But he kept talking, you know, I was just saying, okay. He's like, but, he's like, one day it got so bad, he's like, we went out into the parking lot. He's like, we had words with each other. And he's like, but, he's like, you know, it worked out okay. He said, nobody threw any punches. And, you know, and he's like, and then I just quit. And so I'm like, I was like, no, man. You have those moments in life where you know you're not supposed to laugh. You're supposed to be very professional. So I had to just like, I was with 4 other people and I had to put my head down because I was, I was just dying on the inside. But again, the point is, like, that kind of question can go sideways fast, right, when you're not prepared and how to deal with a difficult coworker. So listen to this gal. She does a great job. This is another one that's really, really well done. They add an L at the end, which is, you know, kind of what you learned, but.
Tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult coworker.
Sure. I was working as a psychology associate at a correctional facility where I provided case management services and daily therapeutic intervention and assessment for adult male inmates who all had severe persistent mental health issues. I was getting ready to leave my job because I was moving out of state and I did train someone to take over on my caseload. The coworker who I was training to take over my caseload was also new to the organization, so she didn't know all the ins and outs of her position. I emailed her to set up several meetings over the course of a few weeks to bring her up to speed. Our first few interactions I thought were somewhat negative. She was very short in her responses to me when I would ask her questions or provide her information, and I thought her speech was very harsh in tone. I originally sort of brushed it off and thought maybe she was just having a bad day, and I didn't think too much about it. But as we continued to meet, I thought the interactions became more negative and I started to feel uncomfortable. I would say hello to her, ask her how she was. She would just ignore me and was really rude. At this point, I thought this isn't going well, and I was really worried that she wasn't going to be trained well enough for when I left. I thought about it for a few days and I knew I needed to do something, but I wasn't sure that going to my supervisor was really the best course of action because I didn't want to blow the situation out of proportion and I certainly did not want to get her in trouble. I decided I would speak to her privately about it and let her know how I was feeling and try to understand what she was thinking and feeling. I let her know that I thought our meetings were unproductive at this time and I was really worried that she was not going to have all the information and be ready to take over my caseload. I also asked her if there was something that I did that made her feel uncomfortable or upset her and to let me know if there was something I could do better. She told me that, it wasn't me. She apologized. She said she was really stressed out because of some personal issues she was having and that she was feeling very overwhelmed with learning the new job and everything that went along with working at the prison. So I think that this talk was really great because I was able to clear up the communication issues and the conflict that I was feeling, and we were both able to let each other know what we were thinking and what we needed. And because she was feeling overwhelmed with some of the other things she needed to do, I helped her with those and brought her back up to speed. And I thought at the time that I was leaving that she was going to be ready to take over my caseload and there was going to be no lapse in treatment for the inmates, which is really the most important thing here. From this experience, I think I really learned that taking the initiative to be assertive and address a conflict with a coworker is a really great first step, especially before involving a supervisor or anyone else in the situation. And I also think I gained a lot more confidence when having to deal with conflict with a coworker in similar situations.
Great, thank you.
Okay. Another really articulate, very detailed answer. And again, that one, it's difficult to she didn't throw her under, I think she did a good job of not throwing her under the bus and like ragging on her. Right? I've seen people answer that question where they just sort of attack the character and they get into sort of like an ad hominem attack and they're talking bad about the person. She did a good job of not doing that. So she seemed real professional and above board and took the high road, but yet she was able to articulately discuss the issue that she was having. So again, that's a long answer, right? But these two practiced so much that did it sound natural? It sounded perfectly natural, right? So again, those are two great responses, and if you can answer questions like that, you're your odds of getting the job will greatly increase, okay? So now we know what happens when you don't prepare responses, right? You talk about facing off against your boss in the parking lot, right? Things of that nature. You get sort of, because you might say something foolish, right? Or too honest. I've seen people say nothing at all. They're like, I got nothing, or just answers that are pretty, just sort of blah answers, okay? It makes you seem incompetent. I saw a gentleman, he sort of had a weird physical, he hadn't rehearsed his answers, and I can tell he didn't practice, and every time he started to think, he'd go, like the whole time, and because he didn't practice in front of a family member or friend, and so he had this nonverbal communication that wasn't effective, and I was sitting there like, what's with the choo-choo train, it was just, and he didn't get hired, okay, right, and so that's the point. You don't get hired, right? That's where do you see how you can spend 5 to 8 hours is not that much time, right? So here's what Seema told me. And I thought it was beautiful advice. She said, right, so how do you implement this, right? So 90%, and I don't know if that's like a hard number, but, the majority of interview questions come from these categories, right? Like the heart of the matter. They're trying to see what kind of characteristics you have, right? How do you cope with pressure, teamwork, leadership, relationships, commitment, decision-making, right? No matter how a question's worded, you can figure out, right, that's what the heart of the matter is. So what Seema told me was this. She's like, come up with 12 to 15 responses that have to deal with all of these characteristics. She's like, memorize them. She's like, and then when you're asked in an interview, you got something to go to, and it just comes out. Does that make sense? So I'm like, oh, because at first it felt overwhelming to me. I was like, how? Like all these stories, I just felt sort of overwhelmed. And then she condensed it down to this. She's like, no. She's like, you have to just figure out in the moment what sort of character trait they're trying to get at, and then go to your back pocket, you've got it in there, and spit out that response that's geared towards that characteristic. So that's what I did, right? And like I said, it hasn't failed me yet, right? So 12, 15 responses. And what I would say, because I've had students ask me this on occasion, they don't have a lot of these scenarios in their life. And I said, that's fair. I said, but now you need to start putting yourself, like number one, go back and try to figure it out. Think about it. Think about different situations you've had in your life. And I said, if you don't have that many, then you need to get your butt doing something that will, get involved with something, right? A project, or you know what I mean? Just make sure, like, hey, again, you're the star of your own movie, right? So start creating that narrative arc and get yourself in those situations that show how you cope with pressure and show how you deal with conflict. You know what I mean? And then you memorize them, and then when the time comes, you have it to give. She was like, think about it like an ATM, She's like, your ATM will never be empty. You'll always have something that'll come out. You'll always have something to give. And again, I thought it was beautiful advice, and it's worked very well for me up until this point. So like it says there, create, okay? So create examples from those 12 categories, 12 to 15. So if you look at some, let's look at some questions here, right? Describe a time you had to deal with a difficult coworker. That was that one. Conflict relationships. Tell me about a time where you had to deal with unexpected adversity in a leadership position. So, hopefully you would have created a star example that had to deal with adversity and leadership. So you've got that to give, right? With the ubiquity of the internet, it's easy for you guys. I didn't have this at my discretion at the time, but what you can do is, try to Google the most common interview questions, right? And then create star responses that apply to you. And that way when you go into the interview, again, you feel prepared. Like I can't tell you how much it helps, because whenever I go into an interview, I trust my work, right? So I go, I just feel, who likes interviewing in here? If you do, you do? Wow, okay, you're lucky. Okay, I'm wow, okay, good for you. You're one of the rarities, one of like 25 people in here. So But what I can tell you is when you know you have these responses in you, and I don't want to be cocky here, but when I go to an interview and I come out of the room and I see the other people sitting there, I'm like, go, you might as well just leave right now because it's my job. And again, I know I sound like a cocky, you know what, right? I sound like a jerk, but it's because I'm confident in the work that I did. I'm confident in my work, right? And that's what this method does. When you put in the work and you apply it, I mean, it just anchors you. You know, you feel like you can walk into any interview and just really do a good job. Okay, right? This particular question, right, has to do with risk taking. Okay, so in terms of checking your responses, they should be substantive. Okay, so let's say you created your responses. You're like, how do I know if they're any good? Okay, because I advocate people type them out and just type them like how you would talk, right? Like a script. So just type them out how you would talk. And they should be at least like 250 to 400 words, right? So again, one response. Or at least 2 minutes, okay? So because you heard those responses from those people, right? Were they short or were they pretty lengthy? They were lengthy. They were lengthy, but they weren't boring. I mean, it held your attention, right? Yeah. Oh, you go.
If you answer like a couple of questions in the STAR method, do they ask you less questions because you seem competent and articulate?
I don't know. That's a good question. I mean, what's happened to me is usually they have like a set number of questions they have to get to. And so usually what I found in my situation, I can't speak for anybody else, and that's a great question, is the interview would go longer because they want to get through all of their predetermined questions. So usually it extends the interview, which is good for you, right? You just get more time in front of them and more time to just, give your articulate answers and for them to remember you. So yeah, usually it ends, usually it extends. But there was one example, actually, when I got hired here, I answered literally like 3 questions, and the lady that hired me for this job here, she shut it down. She's like, look, you're great. She's like, I'm just going to end this interview. She's like, usually we have people go on, and she's like, usually I talk to my colleagues and we discuss if you're going to move on or not. She's like, I'm skipping that. We're going to move you on to the next step, because I knew so much about Wake Tech, and I used the STAR method. She was like, let's just shut it down, and it was on the phone, and so I was like, okay, so that was one, either or it could happen, but either way, right? It's good for you. But that's a really great question. Okay, so read them against the criteria, right? Read it back. Can you pick out the situation? Can you pick out the task? Can you pick out the action, the result? Practice with a friend, for sure. Practice with somebody, or at least record yourself, video and audio. Okay, Seema helped me do this because she identified I had like this physical thing that I would do. She's like, when you don't know something or when you're nervous, she's like, you go like that. I was like, what? I was like, no. She's like, no, you do. She's like, here, watch. Turns around the camera, and I'm like, like tweaking out or something. So, practice with a friend, and a friend, a good friend, a friend that's going to tell you the truth, right? Not your mom. Oh, baby, those questions are so good. You're going to get the job. Maybe you're, a good friend that'll tell you the truth, right? Not as brutal as Seema, but somebody that'll tell you, your areas of opportunity, right? So record yourself, video and audio. I'm not going to make you answer them. This is what I do for class, but we're out of time. So anyway, does anybody have any questions before we end this? Yes.
So is there any way to help improve getting to the part where you actually are able to do the interview?
Very good segue to my next. We have a very special guest in the house this afternoon from the Career and Employment Center. So, but that's a great question, right? Resumes, all of that stuff. So do you want to, so again, we've got a special guest. I'll put her on the spot here, but she knew she'd have to do this, and is happy to do it. But we have a guest again from the Career Center. So.
Yes. Wow, what a wealth of information you've shared. I'm glad that I was in the mix. And you channeled Seema, correct?
Yeah, oh yeah.
So allow us to be your Seema, okay? We are here with the Career and Employment Resources Division. Has anyone heard of our department, our division? What we do, how we do it? Okay, only 2 people. Oh, wow. Well, tell a friend, and you tell a friend, and let the word spread. Because we're here to assist you with this STAR method. You know, we don't use this and promote it as often as we need to, but we will. We will. I will definitely allow my team to see what we've covered here. It is just amazing. So who was impressed by the presentation? Who in their hearts, minds, feel that they can actually move through this method today? Who needs assistance at the next level with this? So we can help you wherever you may be. If you are, and as you mentioned in the back, my partner in the back, I've got this. We can help you hone in on some areas that maybe you haven't thought about. And for others who need that additional support, we will be there to support you. So we have here, is everyone here students at the RTP campus only? Yeah. Okay, perfect. Because we have career counselors available at all of our campuses. You can actually meet with our counselors, set an appointment online, and speak individually about any and every question about your career, about interviewing, about resume reviews. I reviewed 2 resumes prior to coming here. One from scratch. The students, I have no idea. I don't know where to go, where to start, who to talk to. So from scratch, we helped to develop a resume. And then the second had it together, had been working for years in the field of his interests and was interested in the next step. Okay, I worked as a technician, now I'm ready to move on to that engineering sector. I'm ready to become the lead engineer. So we looked at different skills, attributes, qualities, and so forth to place into the resume. So know that you can set that appointment to go in and meet with our career coaches and counselors, okay? Another thing I wanted to add, we have career fairs coming up. Who's interested in a part-time job, full-time job, internship? Okay, everyone here, excellent. Take a look. What are some of the majors we have here? What are some of the majors? Social work, awesome. Engineering, awesome. What about in the back here? Any majors? And it's okay if you haven't decided upon your major. I was that student, changed majors 5 times, and it's okay. I'm still finding myself. It's okay. So the thing is, know that we do have these career fairs available to you. They're all currently this semester held at the Southern Wake campus. Okay? Before these career fairs, make sure you channel SEMA through us, right? So with the mock interviewing practices, reviewing your resume, make sure you come in and see us prior to one of these sessions, okay? Any questions whatsoever? I know time is running out here, but any questions whatsoever? Yes.
With these career fairs, do we have to sign up for them online? Is there a fee to get in, anything like that?
Oh, great question. So we do have an online link to sign up, but you can just show up. No fees are required. That's the beauty of what we do. And for all of these services, they're already paid for. Who paid for them? You did through your tuition, so thank you for supporting us, okay? So the thing is, we're here to support you in all of these different areas. Let us know how, okay? Great question. Any more questions? So I'm Laura Bethay. Did I introduce myself? I just jumped into it. I was so impressed. I'm like, oh, I'm so excited. So our career counselor here is Sonia Hayes. Has anyone met Sonia? Sonia Hayes is our career counselor here. So I'm roaming all around Wake Tech, so you may or may not see me from time to time, but just know that you do have a support system right here. Okay? Thank you for your time. Thank you for inviting me. Appreciate
thank you so much for coming.
Yes, thanks.
All right, give her a round of applause. Thank you, Laura. So before we go, so if you get a job, take my card so you can send me 10% of all your future earnings. Okay, just remember that, or I take cash too. That's okay. I'm just kidding, obviously. So yeah, look, a lot of food left. So again, I appreciate you all showing up. I hope you gained something extra credit, and then otherwise. So there's plenty of food. Please take as much food as you like, all right? Take my card if you'd like. I'm here, I'm available for whatever, you know, if you need help with something, and make sure you signed up. And thank you, everybody. I appreciate it.